Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. I hope this episode helps you thrive in life and leadership. And if you like it, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and that way you'll never miss a thing. Well, if you're like me, you're always looking for ways to stay informed and engaged with the world around us. And that's why I created On the Rise. It's a curated weekly newsletter packed with thought-provoking articles and insights on faith, culture, and the future of the church, and really any other subject that I find fascinating and conversation worthy. And I send it to you absolutely free every single week. So if you're ready to join the conversation and be part of a community of curious, engaged leaders, you can subscribe to On the Rise today at ontherisenewsletter.com. You can start and stop at any point on ontherisenewsletter.com. This episode is also presented by Gloo. Gloo is connecting the faith ecosystem in innovative ways. One way is by making it a lot easier for churches to connect with new visitors. Did you know, for example, that the time it takes for a church to respond to new visitors has a major impact on whether that new person or family will stay? Well, with Gloo, you can use automation to build engaging new visitor engagement journeys. You can learn how at get.gloo.us/visitors. That's get.gloo.us/visitors. And now to today's episode. Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I think everybody is kind of interested in influencers, or a lot of people are, but very few people make it a habit to study them. How did you get interested in studying influencers?
Pure my own passion for them, I suppose. And passion, I will say, is kind of a funny word to use, but I think it is apt in this situation. I came up, when I was graduating from college was really when influencers were becoming very prevalent. And first they started as bloggers. And I was really into reading blogs. And I remember in my first job out of journalism school, I was a homepage editor, and I would just sit there and wait for something to happen. And while I was waiting, I was reading blogs. And I didn't really consider it something that I would ever write about professionally or in my journalism career. But then I ended up over at BuzzFeed News. And I really fell into enjoying doing trending news for BuzzFeed News when BuzzFeed News was first starting. And I founded the trending news team over there. And we were really experimenting with a lot, seeing what people wanted to read, seeing what people wanted to share. And at that point, I had been reading blogs and following Instagram influencers for 5 or 6 years. And it was something that I was really interested in. I found them fascinating, and I found their interpersonal drama fascinating. I found their lives fascinating. To me, they were celebrities. And to everyone that I knew in my quote unquote real life, my friends from college or whatever, we would discuss them as if they were celebrities and talk about them. But we never really saw them in mainstream media. No one was really covering them. Some people were covering YouTubers a little bit, but it was very, it wasn't something that people were talking about a lot. And in my role as the head of the trending news team, I was kind of thinking to myself, why don't we just start covering it and seeing if people are interested? And so we did a couple of stories on influencer drama that was going on online, and they really resonated with our audience. And it was something that I really loved doing. And I happened to have this encyclopedic knowledge of because I had been just consuming it for so long. So then I started actually writing and reporting about it, and really started, honing in on something that I really wanted to explore deeply.
Well, we're going to talk all about influencers because we have a lot of young leaders listening who have platforms on their own. But I got to go to BuzzFeed News for a minute. So it's really interesting. What is the history of that company? I mean, I read the headlines like everybody else from BuzzFeed News, and it's not like the New York Times or the LA Times or the Chicago Tribune or anything like that. It's a much more new not a social media company, but a digital media company. Can you give us a little bit of context on like what its business model is?
That's a loaded question considering what just happened.
I know, because they didn't tell everybody what just happened just before we recorded this.
Unfortunately, BuzzFeed News closed. It's shutting. We found out it's shutting down a few days ago. But
the
I
whole
was there
company or just a division?
Just the news division. So
Okay.
BuzzFeed as an overall company is still a company, and they own the Huffington Post and Complex, and that is continuing on. But BuzzFeed News, the news division, will be shutting down. And I was there for 8.5 years. I was there really for, I think it started in 2012 and I started in 2014. So it turns out I was there for most of its existence. And I think that the only way that this book would have ever come into existence was because I worked at BuzzFeed News, because like I said, they're very much about experimentation. And BuzzFeed as a company was started in the late 2000s as simply a homepage, I guess you could say, for spotting viral trends. So back in 2007, 2008, there was like Dig and Reddit, obviously, and there was things that were quote unquote going viral on the internet, but it was all very new, and there wasn't a lot of websites about viral content and things people wanted to share. And what the founder of BuzzFeed, Jonah Peretti, did was he created a BuzzFeed that would flag these viral trends that were coming up. If that's, a big YouTube video or, a big, this was even kind of really before memes, but, a big blog posts that were going viral or something like that. So that was the origin of BuzzFeed. And then eventually they started doing lists of viral trends. They started making quizzes. They started making videos, all capturing kind of this internet zeitgeist. And BuzzFeed News was really the first news outlet that really lived and breathed the internet and saw the internet as the center of culture and saw it as the place where American / world society and culture was really being created, as opposed to just kind of a side character in everything. For example, we never used any of the traditional news gathering things like the AP wires, or iNews is a program that has all the AP wires and stuff like that. We used Twitter. We are very much like tapped into the web. And I think because of that, I was able to really carve out this niche for us in trending news and internet culture that was really celebrated and understood in a way that I think, everyone's doing it now, but, back in 2015, 2016 was pretty new.
Well, I'm glad you gave us a little history, because at first that's exactly what in my head BuzzFeed was. BuzzFeed was like the latest viral this, the latest viral that. But then in the last few years, and I don't know if this contributed to its demise or not, it started reporting on other events that like the New York Times would report on. Like, I'm like, wait, this is from BuzzFeed? To me, it was like crossing over into almost like a cross between the TMZ and the Hollywood Reporter, where it was starting to cross streams a little bit. And I think the thing that speaks to me about that is a constant sense of experimentation, right? Which
Absolutely.
A lot of leaders are terrified of doing. It's like, we can't experiment. What are the big, first of all, got to talk about the headlines. You were involved in BuzzFeed News. They are almost irresistible. I find it hard not to click on BuzzFeed headlines. So do you have like a formula for headline writing?
I don't want to brag, but I used to teach headline classes at BuzzFeed News.
You can brag. Go ahead.
I also was a pretty big contributor to something that I think people really hate now, which it got really overplayed, which is fine, which is something we kind of invented was, in order to capture the conversation around a news event, we started writing headlines with the format people are saying. People think, Trump's tweets suck, for example, and then like I writing a story about, people getting mad about something on the internet. And And so that, that's my claim to fame is I kind of, was pretty involved in overdoing that headline construction. But I think with headlines, one thing that BuzzFeed was baked into BuzzFeed News' DNA that I think is really prevalent in the journalism industry at large, but I know that I personally really have taken forward from my experiences there was I really believe that people love stories and people love to connect with people want to connect with other people through storytelling. And so I think the best indicator of whether something is a good story or not is if people want to share it. And that's something that we always try to put forth with our headlines, which the thing that I would always say is, don't think in journalism school, don't think in, what would the New York Times put on their website or what would CNN put on their website? Think about if you were going to send this story to a friend, what would you say in the text message? What would you say in the email subject? And it probably would be something like, let's say there's this, clown on fire down the street. You wouldn't say, clown on fire, comma. You would say, this clown is on fire down the street. That's how you would text it to a friend. And that really conversational style, because we wanted it to be so organic that you wanted to share it. And I think, not to get too philosophical, but that was something that always really made me feel very excited about the kind of stuff that I covered. Was, if you look at it, there's a really, business black and white way to look at it, where it's like you're driving traffic, you're driving views, you're driving advertisers, all that kind of stuff if you're doing trending content. But to me, it was like, we have the opportunity to really not only drive conversation on the internet and in culture, but also drive connection with people person to person. You think about how many of your, really closest relationships are truly kept alive by sending links back and forth, or, talking about pop culture, or talking about a mutual interest. So for me, that's always been a really interesting thing about, and a really gratifying thing for me about, covering culture, covering internet culture, was like, wow, you can really create connection between people. And that's what I hope to do with the book as well. I hope it's something people can talk about, and, in my wildest dreams, I picture, a book club or something like that.
Yeah. So if I can get a little more nerdy on headlines, because
Sure.
I have taught in this space as well. I love your idea of writing so that people would share, which is really interesting. So are you, to ask a very short, simple question, are you, when you're creating a headline, writing more for SEO or more for instant sharing? Like, this is going to be a flash in the pan, not something somebody discovers a year down the road via SEO. What was your approach?
I think now, I think there's a lot of more sophistication in, of course, now, SEO and, trying to, optimize for different formats. There's whole audience development teams, stuff like that. But, back when I started at BuzzFeed News, there really was not a lot of that. It was really, like you said, it was all about experimentation, and it was all about trying to make things that people wanted to read and share, kind of full stop. That was it. So yeah, that was the thing that I focused on the most, and still do to some extent, although, we have a lot more sophisticated tools now.
Well, some of us old-time bloggers, I started blogging seriously in 2012 and have a number of friends who have built really big companies doing that. If you look at a decade ago in the blogosphere, sharing was so easy. You would write a post, you'd post it. There's the little share on Facebook, share on Twitter, share on whatever. And people would like share. And I've had articles that have had, easily 250,000 views or 250,000 shares or more. And then that started to die. Facebook changed in 2018. Google started changing its algorithm, et cetera, et cetera. How, because you worked at BuzzFeed right up until almost the very end, March of 2023. How did you get sharing to happen in a world that had changed dramatically? what I'm talking about here is sharing text, like that URL. How did you guys do it? Because you did it, despite its demise, relatively successfully.
Absolutely. I don't think anything changed from my perspective. I have always just wanted to continue to write things that people wanted to share. And I do believe that audience is relative, audience scale is relative, but I do think that if you write something really compelling, the audience will come. And I don't know if that's naive, but okay. I do think, I don't think we're going to ever see the numbers and the amount of sharing that we were seeing in the early days of Facebook. Like you said, millions and millions and millions of views. But I do think that people haven't changed. People still want to read. And I think one of the things that's really been a shame, and I talk about this in the book a little bit as well, is that it's not like people have fundamentally stopped wanting to read something like a blog. In the golden age of blogging, there was just so much to read. And there were so many people just sharing their thoughts and their creativity online without having to optimize and without having to, try and go viral or whatever. And that, I wish we could get back to that, because I think that if we can bring it back, I think the audience is still there. I think that, social media, ad dollars, all of that has just made everything a lot more complicated.
It has made it more complicated. It's interesting. I used to write I still write a church trends post every January. And back in 2016, I think the first year I did it, 2017, that post would get 100,000 page views, easy. And then it was like 80, and then it was 70, and now it's more like 40 or 50. So we didn't experiment because things are moving to short form video, and this is sort of a parable, and then I'll pop the question. But this year, my social media manager said, hey, we had a filming day in December. She's like, shoot 60-second reels that we can post to social on these church trends. So I had to take like comprehensive 3,000 words worth of thought, break it down into 8 60-second posts, which I did. We shot it via video. And what was really interesting is the written post went live. It got 40 or 50,000 views, which is fine. But then we shared trend number 1 on social. It got 120,000 views. And what that told me is, the audience is still there. They've just changed their consumption patterns. Did you see that BuzzFeed?
Yeah, definitely. Is it necessarily that the audience has changed its consumption, or is that that's a whole other podcast, but I think the platforms have had a lot more to do with it rather than audience changing their taste.
Oh, you mean like the big tech companies?
Yeah, look at Substack. When Substack came into the picture, all of a sudden people were signing up in droves for their favorite journalists and authors, and everyone, started a Substack, and people really, really were excited about it. And, there are people with like over 100,000 subscribers on Substack. And to me, that says that people do want to read blogs, and they do want to read in that kind of format. I don't know. I blame the tech platforms personally. I don't think that between 2012 and now, all of a sudden, the only way people can consume things is 60-second videos. But that's just me.
It is, you know what, and it's great. And those who are watching it will realize that, you did graduate from college recently. This is not a 40 or 50-year-old saying, I wish it was the way it was 10 years ago. You're young, you're on the cutting edge, the whole deal. But I think that's really interesting, Stephanie, because what we have is a lot of people trying to get a message out there on this podcast. And I think the lesson is, what worked 5 years ago doesn't necessarily work today. Any other headline tricks or formulas or tips that you want to share with people? And that could be captioning for your Instagram posts or TikToks, or, titling a headline or a blog post.
I think in general, something that a lot of content creators have told me recently over the past couple of years is what they've realized is if you kind of try to chase every single trend, you're never going to get ahead. So there's some people who, were really big bloggers and, were really did well on Instagram. But once TikTok and Reels came out, they tried to pivot entirely to TikTok and Reels. And it was just like a mess. They seemed completely uncomfortable. Not everyone wants to be on camera. A lot of the TikTok trends are, kind of weird if you're not if you're not selling it 100%, it can be a little awkward, I would say. And a lot of people have I think one thing that came out of the Instagram's huge push into Reels when they were really trying to chase TikTok was a lot of influencers kind of came to the realization, especially ones who have been doing this for a really long time, that I don't need to chase every single trend. That's going to make people want to follow people who are authentic, and people want to consume content that's authentic, I think, ultimately. And if you're a creator who really loves the video format, I'm thinking some of these newer lifestyle creators who do, day in my life, get ready with me, all that kind of stuff. Like, I find that stuff very compelling. And there's people that I follow that, do that to a great job. But I think a lot of people are not trying to chase as much, being the biggest and the best content creator out there, but more of finding your audience, really cultivating that audience and really having a loyal audience. And that's something that the brands are really responding to as well. They are really looking a lot more at engagement when, choosing who they're going to partner with and, trying to find an audience that's loyal rather than just a huge volume, because you can have a million followers, but if they're not invested in what you have to say, you might as well have 10,000 really, really loyal followers who will buy whatever you tell them to buy.
What would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about influencers or even the world of influencers?
I think the biggest misconception is that none of it is real. I think there are a lot of people that think that it's all a mirage. Either most influencer followers are bots, or fake, or purchased in some way, and that the influencers themselves are essentially completely fabricated being, if that makes sense. And I think that leads to a lot of people completely writing off the industry, because if you see someone with 1 million followers, but you think all of their followers aren't real, so it doesn't really matter, and you think that they, have no integrity and they, are completely different, Instagram versus in reality, it's really easy to say, oh, who cares about that? So I think that's probably the biggest misconception, I would say.
Well, and to that point, I think most of us have probably seen either a documentary or a post or two or an article about the influencers who rent the private jet for a half hour, get their photo shoot and get out, the people who have bought followers, et cetera, et cetera. In your view, what percentage is that of the industry? Is that are we looking at 1% who do that? 99% actually have 1 million followers, or the people who have 1 million followers? Is it what is the behind the scenes honest truth on that?
I know what documentary you're talking about. And one thing I found interesting about that documentary is there was never actually any influencer who spoke to them who said, yeah, we fake being on private jets with toilet seats. That was something that, as far as I could tell, they came up with. So I found that to be kind of interesting on its face.
Was that the Fake Famous documentary we're talking about? Yeah. Which is an interesting piece. And the premise there is they took average people and made them famous, right? As opposed to exposing somebody who claims to have 500,000 followers, but half of them are bought. Yeah.
Right. I think it depends what you would view as fake. I think that buying followers, as far as I have been able to tell, is not as prevalent of a practice as people would think.
Okay.
I think one thing that is a lot more common, I can go on Google and Google buying bot followers and buy bot followers for $100 or whatever. That's something that anyone can do. But that's not really that common. Just pure bot followers, because it would be really hard to run a business that way, because if you have bot followers, unless I guess you get very sophisticated bots, they're not going to be commenting on your stuff and reacting to your posts and clicking your links. So if you have 50,000 bots and no one clicks on your links, that's going to be really hard to get another brand deal if your last brand is like, oh, we sold nothing because all your followers are fake. I think the thing that's a lot more common is influencer platforms not being 100% organic. And what I mean by that is there is a lot of machination behind the scenes of aspiring influencers who are in Facebook groups or, larger email chains or, text chains or, there's all these different places that people could gather and can kind of boost each other up, So if you're someone who wants to be an influencer, you can join one of these groups and you can get 1,000 people to comment on your post. Now, that's not bots, that's not fake followers, but that's kind of falsifying engagement in a way.
Yeah, that's like scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, right?
Right. Another example would be loop giveaways, which I discuss a little bit in the book, but I've done a lot of reporting on, which is those things on Instagram that you see where it says, me and 10 of my friends got together to give you guys a prize. All you have to do is follow us all. And those actually started on like a macro level with celebrities. The Kardashians are really infamous for doing these, where they'll say they're giving away a $5,000 Gucci handbag. And these giveaways are run by these outside companies that reach out to other accounts, and you can buy what's called a ghost spot in the loop giveaway, which means you pay $5,000 and you can get into this loop where everyone that wants to win a Gucci handbag will follow you. So those are fake followers in a sense, but they're real people. Do you understand what I'm saying?
But they didn't follow you for you. They followed you for the Gucci handbag. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And, that's something that there was a pretty big trend, I would say, starting in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, there started to be a lot of backlash. People got really annoyed with it. And it's kind of fallen off out of popularity. Another example of something you could say that could be fake is if I have an Instagram account and I say, hey, I'm giving away a $500 gift card to Amazon. In order to win, you need to go through all of my posts from the month of April and like and comment on all of them. So that's, again, falsifying engagement. But all of these examples that I'm giving you are not really what people are talking about when they say that influencers are fake, because I think so little people actually understand the machinations of the industry to know that that would be advantageous to do these things, that people just think, oh, it's just a bunch of fake followers. But so that's not really the case, but there are a lot of instances where things aren't exactly what they seem, if that makes sense.
So what is building a genuine, authentic, person by person, no scams, no loops, nothing like that, viral growth on social these days, Instagram or TikTok? Like, it is happening. right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what are the best practices today?
The best practices in 2022 was TikToks and Reels. I watched, this is a true story. I watched a girl that I went to high school with go from a normal person to 1 million followers on TikTok through Get Ready With Me videos. Now, she could have been doing these, these behind the scenes things. But the other thing I think is important to know is no one's going to get 1 million followers by buying followers. That's just not a thing that happens. You can kind of juice your growth in the beginning. You can, I know from personal experience and just from what I've observed that the first 1,000 followers are the hardest to get. Once you kind of hit a thing, like people will kind of start to kind of get more and more in the conversation. But TikTok in particular is very it's the algorithm is so personalized that it's really easy to go viral if you can stick to certain trends. And so what this girl that I know did is she every single day does these videos where she does her morning routine. I don't want to I'm talking about her favorite beliefs. She has 4 kids. She has this very specific lifestyle. She's very cute. And she just goes, a day in my life, 4 kids, morning routine. And they're kind of ASMR-y. They're something that TikTok really, really, really loves right now. TikTok is loving these videos. And I mean, people are blowing up. And that is the case on Reels as well. I've seen people go from 500, especially when TikTok was really pushing Reels. That is kind of the new life. If you're coming in as a lifestyle influencer, that's kind of really the way to go. Watch me go through a day of, so when I was on maternity leave recently, I got addicted to these videos and I was watching this one girl almost every single day. And it was literally just like, watch me get ready with my 6-month-old every day. And it's like, I don't know why I'm watching this, but it's tickling something in my brain. Glomming onto these TikTok trends, not just doing every single trend, but finding something that really fits your niche, fits your audience. That's a really good, that's a good way to grow right now. But things are changing all of the time too. So I think building another thing that's been going on recently, which I think is a really good thing for the industry overall, is brands and management companies and the industry at large has really started valuing engagement rates and follower loyalty over follower counts. So for a long time, it was this, people were really trying to get to 1 million followers on Instagram. And, those are the people who were getting the huge brand deals. But there's been this big push to center the importance of what they call nano and micro influencers, which can be anywhere from 1,000 followers sometimes to 100,000, a couple 100,000, with these really high engagement rates, like 6%, 7%. Because it makes sense, because to a brand that is a lot more valuable. If you have 1 million followers, but only 1% of them engage with your posts, then you're not going to be selling that much relatively. But, if I have 600 followers and every single person buys something off my link, that can be even more valuable in some ways. And I think that's been a really, really great course correction for the industry. Really trying to see, okay, who are these people talking to? Is this someone who has a really great relationship with their audience, which I would say also is something that you can't really fake. You can't, It's really hard to build a loyal audience. It's really hard to build an audience who, if you recommend something, they'll buy it. I'm sure that's challenging, and that takes a lot of trust and that takes a lot of work. And I think another aspect of this is, traditionally and historically, most of the people who were able to get these huge follower counts, were very similar. 99.9% of them were white. It was very hard for Black influencers, other influencers of color to really break out into that 1 million threshold. But there were so many great influencers of color who had these extremely loyal audiences. And, I think after 2020, when the industry really tried to self-correct and, make sure that they were being equitable, that was one way that I know a lot of management agencies started to really hammer home, like, you guys are ignoring our clients who don't have these million follower counts, but have these extremely loyal, engaged audiences. So I think that's one thing that the industry has done a good job of recently, is kind of doing that course correction, and kind of making it so you can't have a fake following. You really have to have people who care about you in order to be successful.
How do you get your audience to engage?
I think number one, I think it takes time and to build loyalty. And I think like the only way to do that is to be genuine and to be, I think everyone's not going to be for everyone, but the people who I have seen who are able to have this career for 10 years, 15 years are the people who have worked long and consistently on building their brand. And again, not everyone's brand is going to be for everyone. There are people on Instagram who their brand might be something that I am not interested in. And I look at their posts and I'm like, I can't stand them. But if they have people that are into that, they will be successful. And I think it's really hard long term to fake that, I think.
No, we were talking before we hit record. You're like, well, how did you build this thing to, 30 million downloads or whatever? And it's been that exactly what you said. It's just, this is a real passion project for me. Mm-hmm. I never thought in a million years it would grow to the level it has. We're very selective about our partners and who sponsors this podcast. And our audience takes action. Like, they will go and click or buy or purchase, but I vet that really, really carefully. And same with the other platforms, my website, my email list, we're really careful about what we feature. And that has proven successful. And then on social, we don't have a huge following. It probably lags behind the other stuff I do, but those 60,000 people who follow me on Insta or whatever, that's been like step by step over time. So that isn't dead. That's what you're saying, right?
Absolutely not. And as you're saying that, I wanted to tell you that you have been able to build this because of influencers, because that is the influencer model. And I think that's something that people don't really understand, that influencers aren't just influencers. Influencers are podcasters. They are, authors, journalists. Right. I built my platform as a journalist by taking cues from influencers as I try to promote this book and get people to buy this book so it's not a, huge failure. Yeah. I am definitely taking cues from influencers. And, so many people kind of use when you talk about, really trying to align your brand with things that, your listeners will respect and care about. That's something that one of the influencers I interviewed talked about in the book, how she has certain things that her followers know she really cares about. One of them is that she is really into using clean products, and she wants to make sure that all of her products are, organic, eco-friendly. And she has to be really, really careful about what products she does affiliate links for and partnerships with, because she did a product that was a perfume, I believe it was. And a bunch of her followers were like, hey, we looked at the ingredients. This isn't super clean. This doesn't really seem like your values. And they got really upset because this is something that she has been very open about caring about. So yeah, I think that it really, really, really matters. And I think I genuinely believe that you can't do this job for more than a couple of years if you don't have a big, big following. And I think, or a real following. And I think a great example of this, and not to get too off topic, is the Bachelor contestants.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like there was a time where if you went on The Bachelor and you made it to a certain level, or even if you were on it for 4 weeks, you would emerge with 500,000 followers on Instagram or 1 million followers on Instagram. And a lot of people were like, oh, this is so annoying. Why is everyone getting to become an influencer? And it was really interesting to see not who emerged from the show. And that doesn't happen anymore, by the way. You can't do that anymore.
Right.
It doesn't happen. But who from the show was able to maintain that audience. And there are people who were on The Bachelor in 2015 who now have been influencers for 5 or 6 years, who have podcasts, book deals, all of this stuff, have a super loyal, engaged audience, and have really been able to build their brand. And then there's people who weren't able to do that and totally fell off. And I think that's a good case study of, you really do have to have even if you get a huge platform, you have to know what to do with it or it's not going to work out for you.
That's such a good point. We, by the way, had Ben Higgins from The Bachelor season 20, I think.
Yeah.
Probably the most popular Bachelor. And he's done great things with the influence that show has gotten him. But it's kind of like, America's Got Talent or The Voice or those shows, right? You can win and sometimes you get a recording contract and sometimes you don't,
Yeah.
You just don't.
I mean, look at Jennifer Hudson.
Exactly. Or Kelly Clarkson. I mean, she knew what to do with that moment. Okay. Well, I want to switch gears and let's drill down even more into the world of influencers a little bit. I would love to have you, I'm just looking for the question here. Here we go. You've written about the dark side of influencer culture. Is there anything else on the dark side of influencer culture that you think people who are looking to build an influence need to be aware of?
I think that, unfortunately, the people who really built the influencer business and economy as we knew it there was no way to know what it was going to become. And I think that young women now have a lot more understanding of what they're getting themselves into before they become an influencer, because I think any career has pros and cons, but I think the influencer pros and cons are very extreme. On the one hand, you can have this really incredible career where you get to work for yourself. You make a lot of money and it's extremely lucrative career. You get to do a lot of fun things. You get to really pursue your passion in many ways. But there's a lot of downsides. Living publicly, even in just the average good days, is extremely taxing on anyone, I think. And influencers are very open to judgment from the public because they are so open about everything in their lives it's easy to contact them, So I think even the most benign influencer, the level of, criticism and hate that they get can be really, really challenging to deal with. But just even on a, boring day-to-day level, it can be really difficult to give so much of yourself and so much of your personal life and kind of not have a personal life and not have, it's really hard when your life is your work.
I know.
And I think that's a pretty difficult, I think that, I'm really curious to see how the kind of the next generation comes up, because I think they have Gen Z is a lot more, millennials, we did a good job, but we were really kind of the first in the front lines of trying to figure out how to work on the internet. And Gen Z,
Totally.
they have a lot more of an understanding of, the pitfalls and how to protect themselves. I'm actually thinking off the top of my head, there was this influencer who was sponsored to go to Coachella. And after 2 days, I think she's 23, she was given the option to leave on the third day, and she left, and she posted a TikTok and she said, I had the option to leave. I didn't stay for the third day, to be completely honest, although being at Coachella is amazing. It's 16-hour days in the middle of the desert. It's very taxing. And, to protect my, I was burnt out and I needed to leave. And there was kind of this debate online, very much like Kim Kardashian, no one wants to work anymore sort of thing. Like, how dare this privileged girl, do this? But I think it is really, really taxing. And I think Gen Z kind of has this really canny, a lot more understanding that you can't just give yourself 100% to the public and just expect to come out okay from that.
Well, see, and that's where you have a lot of insight, I think, where you could perhaps help the listeners of this podcast, because the majority of them lead a semi-public life. If you lead at a church or you lead a company, but particularly at a church, you and if you're on stage as a worship leader, a pastor, a preacher, you have that public persona. And what are some of the healthier practices? Like the people, and I love how you're emphasizing longevity too, because anybody can be a flash in the pan, but to make this something that you're going to do and a message you want to share for years to come, there are people who navigate the public-private dimension of what they do really well and people who navigate it very poorly. What are some of the best practices you've seen? Some of the healthiest influencers who seem to have figured out where that line is and live on the safe side of it or the healthy side of it?
I think that there have been a lot of people who over the past couple of years have been really trying to draw that boundary. I think it's definitely a work in progress for a lot of people, especially, people my age who have been doing this since they didn't realize how much privacy they were giving up. But one thing that comes to mind is an influencer I follow, Dee Rad, takes 2 weeks off a year, which, doesn't sound that crazy on his face. But if you think about it, how many influencers do you know who just go completely dark for 2 weeks? And, a lot of people have said, they're really afraid to even take a weekend off because, they feel like their platform is, kind of punished for not being constantly active.
Right. Is the algorithm going to penalize me or whatever? Right.
Right. But yeah, I've seen her do that, I think around the holidays where she's like, I'm going on vacation. I'll be back in 2 weeks. And her profile goes dark. And that sounds ridiculous for those of us working at a corporate job. But if you think about it, most influencers don't do that. So I think like building boundaries, another one that comes to mind is Krista Robertson, who's an influencer and blogger that has been doing this for a really long time. She had a baby and she's chosen not to share his name, not to share his face. That was a boundary that she drew, and she doesn't share any personal information about him. And we don't know what he looks like. We don't know his name. So that's a boundary. And I think one thing that a lot of people are doing, which I discuss in the end of the book, is a lot of people are starting to see influencing as not a business full stop, but a way to really build a long-lasting business where influencing can just become a part of it. If you talk to almost any influencer who's been doing it more than a couple of years, especially people who are a little bit older, they will tell you, yeah, I have my influencing platform. I have my blog. I've been doing this for a long time, but I recognize that this isn't something I can do forever. And many people are trying to get those book deals, trying to do those podcasts. There's a lot of people want to start businesses, and there's a huge amount of really successful influencers who have built really successful businesses. There's a influencer named Amber Clark who has a line of hair care at Sephora that's been there for a couple of years now and is really successful. And I think a lot of people plan to kind of, once you've really built this loyal audience, you don't have to sell the people stuff forever. You can start selling your own stuff and you can figure out, what's a business that can really have some longevity that I can build, for myself and for my family and, going forward. So I think that's a really exciting thing that's happening right now is people are really starting to nail down, how this can be influencing can just be kind of one part of their empire, so to speak.
Well, I love drawing better boundaries, and I didn't do a good job of that in the early days of social media, I probably shared like a lot of personal moments. And my kids who are now adults, they're kind of like, and they said it just gently a few years ago, but let's just enjoy this as a family. And it's amazing how many times I don't post something really significant or meaningful. And I'm taking more and more pleasure in just saying, this was just a great night out with friends, and the internet doesn't need any evidence of that, or a wonderful date night, and I don't need to prove to everybody that I had a date night, or, some really meaningful time with family that doesn't need to be shared with the rest of the world. Are you seeing more of that? Do you think we're morphing out of that? Or is that
Absolutely.
a sign of longevity? Yeah.
I think that that's something that's happening just not to people that live online in public, but just people in general. I think when influencers started, there really wasn't a lot of downside in sharing everything about their kids.
That's true.
Until like, I think it was, and almost every influencer you've talked to who started, I would say before the year 2016 or so, it really was just a creative outlet. It wasn't supposed to be.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I wouldn't even call myself an influencer, but you know what I mean? Like I see that as a separate species, but like that was just a creative outlet for me to try to help other people.
Yeah. And so I think, that's one of the things that, one of my favorite parts of doing the reporting for the book was one of the people I interviewed, Shannon, she's been a mommy blogger for a decade, and she, was doing it before anyone really was thinking about this kind of stuff. Like, okay, what would it be like for your mom to be sharing things on the internet about you? How much of yourself do you want to give away for free to the internet? And that's something that she's really thinking critically about now. And I think is a really fascinating conversation. But I think that's also something that we're all trying to figure out. Like I said, I have a baby, and, sometimes I feel like I stopped myself recently where she's doing something, or I'm like trying to get a photo of her, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to enjoy this moment. And not everything needs to be a photo. She's going to have 100 times the amount of baby photos than I had,
Oh yeah.
Like trying to capture her doing something cute or saying something cute instead of enjoying the moment. You're kind of like, oh, I need to get this. I need to get this. So me and my husband have really been trying to make a pointed effort of being like, you know what, we're not going to try and film every moment. We're just some things can just be for us. And yeah, I don't know. I think everyone's trying to do that on a micro level as well.
Stephanie, you hinted at this. And by the way, we've referenced the book numerous times. It's called Swipe Up for More, and we'll talk about it at the end as well. But let's pivot to the haters, the snarkers, as you call them, the negative commenters. Church leaders have taken real hits on that over the last number of years. I mean, think about it. You lead a church of 100 people, you have 100 opinions. Lead a church of 1,000, you have 1,000 opinions. And because it's so public, they've been beat up. But every leader has been beat up. What are your best tips, or what have you seen influencers do well when it comes to dealing with haters, snarkers, and negative people?
I think it's really, really hard. I think the general consensus of the industry is to ignore it.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think that the best practices that I've seen is if someone, thinking critically about the criticism, but, I mentioned in the book that there are forums and websites dedicated to hating on influencers, and they really range. Some of them are, genuinely like, oh, this really disappoints me that XYZ would do something. And I think if I was an influencer, I saw some, and even I'm sure as a journalist, sometimes I get, DMs or emails or comments that I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, yeah, that probably, that story I wrote, or that line or something I put on social media, that wasn't my best. That's something that I should, own up to. But then there's also crazy stuff you get. And so if you took every single one of those to heart, you would go insane. And I think too, a thing that's really, really interesting about influencers, which I'm not really sure has ever really applied to celebrities in this way, although I think it's starting to in some aspects, is there are people who spend hours and hours and hours dedicated to hating on just one influencer. And there's an internet term for this called eating crackers. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear on your podcast.
We'll take care of it. Yeah.
But the idea of it is someone annoys you so much that anything they do annoys you. So like you would see them eating crackers and you'd be like, oh, look at that bitch eating crackers like she owns the place. That's where that comes from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And honestly, the only public figure that I've ever seen this BEC is what it's called on the internet, applied to is Meghan Markle, which is a whole other can of worms. But since influencers and bloggers and public figures started, there have, you can find forums where hundreds of people post thousands of comments a day about things, every single slide an influencer posts because they hate them just that much. And I mean, how do you as a human being respond to that? There's no way to respond to that. That's totally insane. So I think having a little bit of a nuanced eye in how you handle this kind of stuff is probably the only way to get through it. But I think that's also, something that, the next generation is going to have to kind of grapple with. It's like, if you enter into this job, you are entering yourself up to that level potentially of criticism. And that's really difficult for anyone to deal with.
Oh, it's super hard. And we have an excellent audience. I absolutely love the people that we have the privilege of working with. And we get off pretty light on this stuff. But every once in a while, there's also what I call issue people, where if you trip over something, they will just DM you, email you incessantly about one issue. And we found the best thing is to acknowledge and not respond. Just like, thank you for your opinion. And just keep going on. There are some wars you can't win. You also, I'm so glad you dealt with this in Swipe Up for More, but you talk about mental health and that being in that public eye, being an influencer, getting that many negative comments, getting, even, living in that bubble on a regular basis is provoking some mental health issues in influencers. Can you talk about what you see and some best practices to deal with that phenomena?
I think it's a real challenge. And I think it's something that is happening really on a societal level, because I think it's something that's affecting not just influencers, but any public figure. I think any celebrity right now is dealing with a level of criticism that they've never dealt with before, because the internet is just totally insane. But I think it is really, really challenging. In the book, I make an analogy to a tightrope where being an influencer can be a really, really incredible thing where, again, there's, especially in this economy, there's something to be said about having your own business where you can make potentially millions of dollars a year and you own it outright and you don't have to answer to anyone. And, it's really, really incredible. So you're doing this really incredible feat, but you're on a tightrope. And if you just make one little slip, you can really be in a bad situation. Whether that's, a genuine faux pas that you have to own up to. But even if you do something that, people just decide to turn on you, which happens all the time. And, you could also argue that the slip off the tightrope could be your own mental health, that the unrelenting criticism can be something that eventually just takes you down. And I think it is really challenging. And I think, again, that's kind of why there is this really big push in the influencer industry right now to focus on things like taking breaks, setting boundaries, and again, diversifying your business where, if you're someone who, is an influencer, but you have a really robust, if you have a podcast about something you're passionate about, and then you also have this really incredible product line, then you don't necessarily have to Instagram story all day because you have these other revenue streams coming in. And you have other things that you can do as part of your business, that selling yourself isn't the entirety of your business. So that's the thing I think people are really doing right now to try to protect their mental health and really try to set those boundaries. But I think it can be really challenging.
I think that business of looking into a camera again and again and again and again, or getting behind a microphone, it's got to have boundaries and limits. On that note, monetizing influencer platforms, how does that usually develop? And talk a little bit about how brand partnerships really work.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I would like to hear specifics. What would you like to know specifically?
Oh, yeah. So if somebody has 1,000 followers, 5,000, 10,000, they're a bit of a niche online, but they definitely have momentum. How does that tend to work? I have a friend in the coffee space who's literally started it a couple of years ago as a product, as a project, I should say, has, I think, almost 60,000 followers now on Instagram, and a YouTube channel that's blowing up. And I mean, the coffee gear he gets is incredible. Lots of brand partnerships. But how do you get from starting to there?
I think you have to be really savvy about who you partner with, and because I think brand partnerships is kind of another tightrope, because, I have 30 something thousand followers on Instagram. And if I just started tomorrow selling anything on my Instagram that anyone paid me to do, my platform would go south very quickly. So I think that's like another cultivation strategy where you really have to spend the time to get to know the brands, to try to pick like what is actually something my audience will want to buy, to integrate it into your content pretty seamlessly. But in terms of how people reach you, I think another interesting thing about, this economy is, as influencers have really come up, so have all of these other brands that are social media first. And so I think while, some people have gotten really successful at selling themselves, a lot of people who never really would have become business owners were able to really create and start their own businesses via social media. So, and I talk about this a little bit in the book as well, that a lot of the first big brand partnership companies were these direct-to-consumer, social-first companies who, to be quite honest, normal ad agencies kind of, sniffed at, like, oh, who are you? Whatever. And some of them have really become, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like Diff Eyewear or something, like something where, maybe they didn't, you think about it from a brand perspective. So you want to start a sunglasses company, and you might not have the budget for, a big advertising budget. So instead of following, the normal path to business, why not just send 50 pairs of sunglasses to influencers with 5,000 followers, 10,000 followers. And if they really like them, then that's kind of mutually advantageous for both of you. So I think like that's something that a lot of people also kind of don't think about a lot. It's like, yeah, of course, there's a lot of, I think a lot of times people kind of make fun of like Instagram famous products or influencer products, as, like, oh, influencers all kind of sell out to the same people and they're all shilling the same stuff. But in actuality, they're kind of like two parts of the same coin, two sides of the same coin, where like there's a lot of businesses I think that wouldn't exist without influencer marketing because it gave them the doorway to really grow as a brand.
Yeah. And so is it that brands approach you, or do you have to start hustling and approach brands? I mean, what we did with the podcast and beyond is we just started sharing content. We got this huge audience. People started knocking on our door, and I said, no, not for a while. I want to build trust. I want to understand my audience. And then when we found the right partner and the right timing, we moved ahead. But it was a very slow process. And I had entrepreneurs like whispering in my ear, man, you should do this now. And I'm like, no, I want to do this for the long term, and let's find the right people, the right timing. Let me get to know my audience better. And so it was probably 2 or 3 years after millions of people started showing up that we said, okay, we'll welcome some sponsors on and take it from there. Is that too conservative an approach? And we're real happy with where we landed on that, but monetization wasn't my first priority.
I think it's definitely influencer by influencer. I think some people, once they hit 15, I've heard of people that once they hit 1,000, 1,500, they'll start cold pitching themselves to brands, especially brands that they know that they're aligned with. I think that would probably be something that would happen more commonly today, this day and age. I would say 5 or 6 years ago, it was 100% brands coming to influencers, brands seeing that opening, seeing, for example, one of the women I interviewed in my book, Caitlin, her brand was very much, she lived in South Carolina and then North Carolina. She, had this kind of, preppy Southern girl vibe going on, and a company that makes these, very Southern style monograms, koozies and, necklaces and stuff like that, reached out to her because they were like, hey, your readers are probably our customers. We want to give you some stuff for free. And so you will wear it and people will buy from us. So I think that was definitely in the beginning of the industry, like a lot how it happened. But I've definitely heard of people, once they get, again, 1,500, 5,000 followers, start pitching themselves, selling themselves. There's also a lot more structure in place now where, once you get to a certain follower or engagement level, you can start trying to find a manager. I know that management companies, are always looking for new talent. So they might reach out directly to the influencer if, if one of the agents sees them and likes what they're doing. And I would say even in the last couple of years, it used to be that, management companies are it's typical to a celebrity where most big influencers have someone who will negotiate on their behalf, these brand partnership deals. And I would say it used to be really only people who were pretty big, like at least 500,000 followers had an agent. But what I've seen over the past couple of years is there's that job category has really exploded in growth. And there are so many more influencer agencies, for all different types of influencers from big to small. And I say that most people I see who have even just like 20,000, 25,000 followers have an agent at this point, which, I think is now probably doing the majority of that kind of negotiating and pitching them out to people, which is good. That's a sign of, a real maturation of the industry and, keeping things above board and having, having like contracts and all of this stuff. Whereas before it was really kind of whereas before it was really the Wild West.
Yeah. Well, all I can say as we wrap up is I am a car guy. So if there's anyone from an auto company listening, reach out to me. DM
yes.
me. Anyway, I'm kidding. I don't have a car sponsor.
One of my influencers in the book, she had a partnership with Ford where she got a free Bronco. So never stop believing. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Got to hold out for that. That would be great. Yeah. Well, Stephanie, we covered a lot. The book is called Swipe Up for More. It's available everywhere. Tell us where we can find you online and about your Substack.
Yeah. So I think the best place to find me online is my Instagram. It's at Steph E. McNeal. That's where I share the majority of my reporting. I am a senior editor for Glamour magazine, so most of my writing lives there. And I have a Substack as well. It's just stephaniemcneal.substack.com, which is more of a personal blog that on my Instagram page, I like to share things happening in culture and the influencer industry and, ranging from funny stuff to things I like to read and book recommendations, all that kind of stuff. And once a week on my Substack, I share other internet culture stories that I've enjoyed, my own writing, just kind of a nice roundup of what happens on my Instagram.
That's great.
But yeah, that's where you can find me, all over the internet.
Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.